Gentlemen, brothers and sisters. Oh, I think maybe.
You're
Yes, good
okay.
evening,
Just
brothers and
restart.
sisters.
Just
Are we clear?
restart. Yep.
All right. Yes, I am pleased to welcome all of you this evening to the Book of Mormon Perspectives Forum. This is 2.5 years plus that we have been meeting on Monday evenings at 8 p.m. Central Time to hear presentations and to discuss. I would point out that next week we're planning an open forum in which those of you that have questions, testimonies, comments that you'd like to make should have an opportunity to do so. We have not had the open forum for testimonies for some time, and I've had a couple of requests for that, so we'll open that opportunity for, especially for next week. And then the following week we have John Charles Duffy coming to present on the preparation of ceremonies for celebrating the Book of Mormon and church history. And I think you'll find that very interesting. It'll be shortly after his performance in the leadership of the commemoration of Joseph and Hiram's assassination in Carthage on June 27th. And so it'll be the following Monday that he'll be addressing us on that. This evening, it is my pleasure to welcome and introduce our speaker, Jim Britt. I had the privilege of meeting him this spring when I came to Nauvoo in May and found him working here with Bob Smith, working on the fourplex, trying to take care of plumbing and other issues to make it so that we would have a facility for the future field school from Western Illinois that is planning to start here next year. We have one student this year who has been here as a independent study student, and she'll be going to work on the archives this week. But right now we have the artifacts from the times and seasons spread in the dignitary house on the tables for people to help us examine.
Paul, you're muted now.
I've had comparatively brief experience in knowing Jim Britt, but in our conversations while I was here on the dig and here he was working on the site, it struck me that he has a rather unique approach and some interesting research. And since ours is a perspectives forum, I asked him to share his perspective with us this evening, and I'm looking forward to what he has to share. In the previous discussions that we've had about it, I found myself not necessarily agreeing with him, but appreciative of the connections that he's made in history, and I think you'll find that worth considering as well. Let us pray. God of creation, whose work needs no decoration, whose sunsets, rainbows, and flowers extend well beyond the imagination of the human template. We bow in appreciation that your awesome creation extends beyond time and space, beyond where we can contemplate. And yet you see fit to bless us and equip us by providing us with a plan beyond our time and space, in which we can, by being who you created us to be, that we are blessed and can be transformed by your divine grace. And as we contemplate our failed covenant rate, we need your grace to see eternity. So to appreciate and even contemplate your willingness to trust in us, your consideration that with us, around us, beyond us, your presence can help to elevate us to a perspective beyond what we are able to see. And we thank you. And this evening we ask your blessing on our forum and on our presenter, Jim Britt, praying that as we consider his presentation. And even though we may not agree, that we will appreciate the world that you did create and the brotherhood that ties us to the family tree. And we pray in the name of Jesus, whose grace and commitment to us offers opportunity for eternity. Amen. Okay, Jim, it's yours. You have a PowerPoint, I think, and if that PowerPoint can be shared, fine. If not, then the floor is yours anyway. Thank you. Welcome to the forum, and thank you for coming tonight.
Not a problem. Appreciate you inviting me here. A couple things before I begin. A little bit about me so you can understand my paradigm when I look at the Book of Mormon. I did not grow up as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but I joined it when I was 10 years old. I came from a mixed marriage, and I'll say that because my dad was from the north, so he was all Roman Catholic. My mother was from the south, so she was all Southern Baptist. We were Episcopal, and my dad was always a seeker of truth and quite a knowledgeable person. He had degrees in history, and he's drugged me around more Civil War campgrounds than I can shake a stick at. So I have a bent for history, and I have a bent for archaeology. And if it wasn't for the Air Force, I probably would have done something with that. But instead, I got a different kind of degree so I could go fly jets. But when I look at history, I typically use that same kind of philosophy that I did when I flew jets. I try to be dispassionate about history and just kind of try to look and see what I see. And I first off want to apologize to anybody if I offend. It's not my intention to offend anybody. I know we all come from different backgrounds, have different beliefs. So I just want you to know my intent here is to try to kind of share what I've learned and to hopefully show some of the things that I call them, oh gosh, what's the word? Gosh, my brain just went blank. I'm getting old. But they are anomalies and in the scriptures, and they drive me crazy. And I've been trying to figure them out, and I think I found some of them, and some of them have helped me to understand the Book of Mormon. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start my presentation. I think I'm going to try for 45 minutes. If I go beyond that, somebody yell and I'll shut up because I tend to talk too much according to my wife. So hang on one second. Let's get this going. And that goes there and share. Okay, so I think the title that Paul and I came up with was The Covenant of Lehi and the United States of the Latter Days. When I first started looking into the Book of Mormon, I was a believer with everybody else that it was in South America. And the reason was I watched the Jack West slides. It had started off in Peru, and that was the narrow neck of land, and it kept on going. And as I've gotten older, I realized, they moved it from there. They moved it up to Guatemala, one part of Guatemala to another part of Guatemala. And at this point, I just have decided that I couldn't understand that. So I had an idea, and I thought I would start to look in the Book of Mormon myself to try to find it out. I'm a big believer in history. I believed in the Hittites before they found the Hittites. I believe in the city of Tanis before they found the city of Tanis. And so some people believe that the Book of Mormon is just a spiritual book. Other people believe it's a history. I believe it's both, just as you can find the people in the Old Testament. If you know which area to sync up, you start to see them in their ancient habitats. So that's what I kind of did. And then I kind of got the idea, GPS has never worked for a lot of people, so why don't we do it a different way? And I just decided to look at it of the words of Christ. And I realized that Christ had set a covenant with the land that the Lehiites had lived on. And so and I'll be honest, it's been 3 decades, I wrote a book. And as you can see there, that was my neighbor who drew this. This is basically just pouring the water back into the aquifers that you find in the United States. And that's kind of what popped off the page at me. So I thought it was kind of fun. So I thought I'd show you that. But basically, my book is broken into 2 parts. My first part deals totally with the spiritual side, the covenant. The second half deals with the evidence that has been found that you're able to, when you put it all together, it actually starts to make sense. And so, but today we're going to talk about the first part, and I've broken it into 4 areas. One, how the Lord defines the house of Israel. This is a key component to understanding the covenant that's on the land of Lehi. The second part, we'll talk about the allegory of Zenus, which ties this all up in a nice pretty bow so you can actually have a pathway to follow it. While we're doing that, we'll talk about the land of Lehi, why it's so different from all the other promised lands that like Zenos talks about. And then finally, the most important thing is, how does this all relate to us in reality that we see today? What's it matter? And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. So the first key to Lehi's covenant is to understand what is meant when we call it the house of Israel. So when Christ came in 3rd Nephi, and he was talking to the Nephites that were at the temple of Bountiful, he called them, O ye house of Israel. What is the importance of this house of Israel? Well, it's meant different things in different parts of different eras, but let's go ahead and just start with the general definition. Okay, the tree of Israel, it's the original house of Israel with the 12 tribes. Isaiah calls this the first. Zenos calls it the first fruits. It's a combination of all the sons of Jacob. As a kingship, it was first led by Saul. Then after he was replaced with David, and it continued on until Rehoboam, when the prophet went and gave the keys of the kingdom to Jeroboam, and Judah ended up seceding from the tree of Israel and created their own little tree. So it's a separate tree. So when we start to talk about the allegory of Zenos, we need to understand where in time and space these things happen. So this is after the splitting of the kingdom of Judah and the establishment now of the kingdom of Israel. Just a little background on the house of Israel. There is something that's in Genesis that kind of will help us understand the key that I'm about to tell you. The key is this. There are actually two houses of Israel. There's the original house of Israel, which was comprised of the 12 tribes, but there's another house of Israel. And we find it actually when we go to the Joe Smith translation. And by the way, thank you for those of the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ for giving us back the Joe Smith translation. If we go to Genesis chapter 48, 5 through 11, in verse 5, this is when Joseph went in to see his dad Jacob because he was starting to die, and he wanted him to bless his children. Everybody remembers the story where Jacob crosses his arms and he gives the birthright to Ephraim instead of to Manasseh. And he gets all upset and he thinks his dad has made a mistake. But in the Joe Smith translation, the very last line, it says, well, basically, let me read to you. And now of thy two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, which were born unto thee in the land of Egypt, before I came unto thee in Egypt, behold, they are mine. And the God of my fathers shall bless them, even as Reuben and as Simeon. They shall be blessed, for they are mine. Wherefore, they shall be called after my name. Therefore, they were called Israel. So to me, this is a key, is that Ephraim and Manasseh together are going to be called Israel. But when are they called Israel? Well, again, going back to my analogy of or my discussion of Isaiah and Zenos, when we read Isaiah, everybody admits it is written for two time periods. It's written for the original house of Israel, and then there's this another house of Israel that comes about. And according to Christ in 3rd Nephi chapter 21, I believe, he says, this is going to happen again. And, chapter 20. And so he was talking to the Nephites when he said that. So I kind of just in my brain said, okay, so if the house of Israel in the last days that we're looking at, it's going to be just a combination of Ephraim and Manasseh and not the original 12 tribes. So if I take this paradigm shift, and that's kind of what it is, you're going to have to shift your paradigm from the 12 tribes to just Ephraim and Manasseh. We're going to see how this plays out in the scriptures, how it plays out in reality. There was a graphical illustration to the children of Israel talking about these two houses of Israel. The first one, they called it, if you read in Genesis or in the Old Testament, it talks about the house of Israel being described as a unicorn. And we're not talking about the little fun horse with flowers and a big horn. Actually, it was referring to a single-horned rhinoceros. Think of the Siberian rhinoceroses, which is depicted here, has a big stinking horn. It was considered a beast, something that was immovable, something that was powerful. But it also describes a Biconius rhinoceros, which had two horns. And in fact, in Deuteronomy, when the Lord is talking through his prophet, he talks about the fact that the ratio of Ephraim and Manasseh would be tens of thousands to the thousands. So Manasseh would have the thousands, but Ephraim would have the tens of thousands. And that's what you see in the Biconius rhinoceros. You have this huge horn up front and then this little horn down below. So that kind of just, hopefully that helps kind of gel the fact that, you know, when we talk about the house of Israel in this discussion, we're going to be talking about just two tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh. Hang on, let's see here. Now, so the question then becomes this: were the Nephites an Ephraimite or Manassehite nation? I know that seems like a stupid question, a nonsensical question, but it actually is going to help us, because in the scriptures, like in Ezekiel, where it talks about when the Book of Mormon comes forth, it calls it the stick of Ephraim. Well, most of us already know that Lehi was a descendant of Manasseh. That's what it says in the Book of Mormon. So how can he be an Ephraimite? That doesn't make sense to me. That was always one of these anomalies that made me scratch my head and try to figure out what was going on. Well, if you look at Hebrews, and if you go back and you look at the rabbinical traditions, as a Hebrew, you get your cultural identity from your mother and your inheritance from your father. This is evidenced by, hang on, I'll come back to that in just a second. The second part of that is typically the Hebrew people were a matrilineal patriarchy. In other words, the mother would pick the next patriarch. You can see that with Isaac when he was chosen by his mother to go in instead of Esau. You can see that with Sarah choosing, sorry, I got the wrong one. It was Jacob being chosen instead of Esau. You have Isaac being chosen instead of Ishmael by Sarah. But in the case of the Nephites, or the children of Lehi, it wasn't done by the mother. It was actually done by God. So God, by commandment, commanded Lehi to send his children back to Jerusalem to gather the family of Ishmael. Now, if we still had the 116-page manuscript, apparently in that it talked about the fact that Ishmael was a descendant of Ephraim. And again, going back to, you get your cultural identity from your mother. If we apply that, all of a sudden, all the children, all Lehi's grandchildren were Ephraimites, because their mothers were all from Ephraim. You know, there's a little quick aside here that I can throw in just to kind of buttress this point. I've always wondered why Saul was the first king of Israel. He wasn't an Ephraimite. He didn't have the keys or the birthright. So how did he get there? And actually, it was in Chronicles, I think, where it talked about the war that the house of Israel had against the tribe of Benjamin, and how most of them were all destroyed except for about 400 of them. And they felt really bad after they done it. It was actually Judah that had gone in there and destroyed them. And they felt really bad that they were going to destroy one of the houses of Israel. So they kind of got together, and they had a bunch of people that they had saved from a town that they had destroyed, which was a Manassehite town. And they said, well, you know, I think it was 600 people that were saved, and they were in a cave. They gave the 400 Manassehite virgins to these Benjamites, but then they still had 200 that didn't have wives. And so they came up with this idea, and basically it was, well, let's just go ahead and let them come. At Shiloh, we're having this dance next week. Hide in the bushes. When the girls come out, reach out, grab as many as you want, take them, and you can use those for your wives. That way we won't violate our covenant not to give you kids, give you wives. You can get wives, and we can continue to have the tribe of Benjamin. Well, those women that were dancing that day were actually Ephraimite princesses, or royalty, that were out there dancing. And so when you look at it, it is a good possibility that Saul's mother was one of those, or grandmother was one of those Ephraimites. And that kind of fixes that anomaly. And it kind of also buttresses the change of the Nephites from Manassehite to an Ephraimite nation. Now, we were going to talk about the covenant. So I'm going to actually talk about the allegory of Zenos, because this is I think the most important thing. And Zenos was an ancient prophet. He predated Isaiah. Isaiah used some of his writings in his writings. So he wasn't just a made-up imagery. I mean, you find his writings in Isaiah. But here I've got a little graphic that kind of shows just the breaking off of the branches. You have the first planting, which was in a poor land. You have the second planting, which was in the poorest land in the vineyard. You have the third planting. There's no mention of land, but there is another tree branch that they talk about, but it disappears later on. And then you have the final planting, which is and the choice is part of the vineyard. The choice is land. Okay, so basically it kind of boils down that there's like 7 different trees in this allegory. The other trees I come up with are the kingdom of Judah, which is still hanging around. You have the trees of the Gentiles, and then you're going to have the trees where the Gentiles have mixed with the house of Israel. So here, when I wrote my book, I wrote it as cairns, which are basically piles of rocks on a path to kind of keep you on the right way. So let's do a reality check here real quick and just see. All right, that's the initial discussion of Zenith. Is there any evidence on the fact that this actually occurred in history? Well, if we go back to the destruction of Israel, which was what, 740-ish BC, they were hauled off into Assyria. They transported in peoples that were not members of the house of Israel, and they intermarried, creating the Samaritan population that was there until the time of Christ. Okay, that's, those are Gentiles coming in and marrying with the remnant of the people there. That's part of the allegory of Zenith. You have the people from there going and moving over into the areas where they went. I think they finally discovered that in today's history, if you go find the people, they're the Pashtuns in Iraq and Afghanistan. They claim that they were the children of Ephraim, and if you look at their DNA, they have the R. Oh gosh, what's the word? My brain just went blank. Mitochondrial DNA, not mitochondrial. That's the wrong word. I'll get it out in a second. But anyways, they have the male R marker, but their mitochondrial DNA is different. And but so you have them there doing that. So there you have an intermarrying of grafting of branches in that general region. But then, according to I think it's in the book of the Apocrypha, it talks about the fact that the Israelites had repented and they left and they went north. Nobody knows where they went. They just got up and left and they disappeared. Again, going back to the allegory of Zenith, when that branch disappears before the birth of the Savior, the Apocrypha is actually matching that. You have other people that are intermarrying into the Jews. You have the Ethiopian Jews that had married into the house of Israel. You have Sparta was actually, the Spartans were, they got the 300. The king of Sparta had written a letter to the high priest in Jerusalem. This is right before, oh gosh, I forgot the date. I'll have to come back on that one. But basically saying we're cousins. So you have all this intermixing of this blood, these roots, with all these graftings going on. So we actually start to see that what the allegory of Zenith was saying is actually something that we can see in history. All right, next point, the promised land of Lehi. Why is that so important? We talked about the other lands. You got a poor spot of land and a poor spot of land. Why is the land of Lehi so stinking important? And there are a few things that kind of go with this. One, it's a holy land and it's a precious land. Enos talks about the fact that it's a holy land. Later on, we're going to learn that, the city of Enoch is going to come back. So it's the land of Adam. It's where Adam dwelt. It's the land where the New Jerusalem is going to be built. We actually know where that is in Independence, Missouri. It's the land of the restoration, where the Book of Mormon came forth. It's the land, again, like I said, where the city of Enoch will return. And if you read Moroni, it's the land of Ephraim and Manasseh. I mean, that's what he talks about. He says it's the land where, you have Ephraim and Manasseh dwelling in the land. There's an interesting comparison, though, between the house of Israel in the ancient, in the Middle East, and then the house of Israel, the latter-day house of Israel in our land. They're both deemed holy lands. They both have had a city translated. If you come to where the latter-day house of Israel is, it's the city of Enoch. But if you go back into into Jerusalem, it's the city of Salem. In the original area where Abraham was, the covenant was established. In this area, you have the covenant restored. An interesting thing that a lot of people have been talking about lately, and it also explains why the Jews got a little bit crazy during the time of Christ. You have two messiahs. You have the Messiah ben David, who is a redeemer, savior. If you read the Joseph Smith translation, you see Joseph talking about one of his descendants will be the Messiah, will be like a Messiah, not the redeemer and the savior, because it's the Messiah ben Joseph. But then Christ was the Messiah ben David. He was the redeemer. And so when he came, they were actually expecting a restorer to come, they wanted him, the restorer is supposed to come and kick out all the bad people and make it great. And that's not what the Savior did. But again, if you look at Jerusalem, they have the Messiah of David. If you look at the land where the Nephites dwell, they were going to have the Messiah in Joseph. In the Middle East, that's the 12 tribes will be able to go back to there. Now, the Ephraimites and Manassites also had real estate in that land too, but over here they have their own land when you have the seed of Ephraim and Manasseh. They both have a city named Jerusalem, one New Jerusalem. And what's interesting also is they both have these latter-day wars that are going to plague them. One is the War of Armageddon, we read about in Revelations. The other one is the War of Gog and Magog, which is at Ezekiel. The War of Armageddon deals with the Jews in Jerusalem, but the War of Gog and Magog deal with the latter-day Israel. So wherever that is, that's what's going to happen. So what does the Book of Mormon say about this covenant? We first look at the words of Christ found in 3rd Nephi. When he came back the second day after the Nephites had accepted him as his king, he began to teach them a little bit about who they were. He had talked about the fact that they were going to be the ones who would help with the restoration, that they were the ones that were going to lead the building of New Jerusalem. Everybody else who came were just going to assist, but it was going to be the Lamanites, because we know the Nephites are all destroyed, but basically saying the children of Lehi would be the ones that would lead the restoration and the building of New Jerusalem. The allegory of Zenith, when we look at that one, it also says that they will be the first branch restored. Nephi, when he looks at his children, he gives prophecies, the last in 2nd Nephi chapters 2 through 14, he's not allowed to talk about what John's supposed to see, but he uses Isaiah 2 through 14 as his the basis for his prophecy that he's going to give about his children in the last days and on their promised land. And when you read Isaiah and you understand who he's talking about, you see these things coming about, which Christ talked about, which the allegory of Zenith talks about. Moroni, again, he talks about the same things when he talks in Ether about the last days. Again, just really quick, the Lehi was not just some rube who was a traitor. He was actually a descendant of Zenos and Zenock. When Christ comes, he calls them the children of the covenant. If you look at the, let's see, I talked about the leading of the thing. One of the interesting things is when Christ's there, he talks about the fact that read Isaiah, because what you're going to find is in the last days, the same things that happened to ancient Israel are going to happen again. So if you know that, you can see it's happening. And so the same plagues that were described in Israel and Isaiah, we're going to see again in our day. I have a little bit more to talk about this in the last part, because there are people that are Messianic Jews that understand the house of Israel, and they understand the covenant curses that were going on against them. And they're seeing them happening in America, and they cannot figure out why they're happening here. They have different ideas, but they see these covenant curses occurring. And you can even see them today. As we look out, we see the world is changing, and it is changing dramatically in the way of the religion of Balaam. All right, let's see. The covenant was to begin the restoration with the Lehites. So when you see it was not until the Book of Mormon came forth and the Gospels, it was just soon after that the Jews finally started to be able to go back to their promised land. So the key thing there is that something happened to enable the Jews to go back to the homeland, and we know that Joseph Smith sent representatives over to Israel to rededicate it. So my question is, so when I saw this and I started to put this all together, my question then became, how does this paradigm shift when we look at the books of Isaiah, the book of Ezekiel, Daniel, Revelations? When you sync up Isaiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, Revelations, Nephi, they all look at the same events. They're the events from the restoration to the building of New Jerusalem. They come from different perspectives, but they're all pretty much talking about the same thing. Hang on a second. Let me see if I can get to the next slide here. So we're going to do a little reality check again. What do we see that's going to confirm our hypothesis about the words of Isaiah? So I've got a couple things here. Let's look at the founding fathers and the hand of providence. Now, when you read there's a lot of people that have written books about the fact that when the founding fathers came to this land, it was almost like there was somebody protecting them that was from God. I mean, you even have commentary by some of the Native Americans saying, where did the Great Spirit go? What's going on? I mean, they weren't wicked and terrible. I'm talking about the Native Americans. Were trying to live good lives too. I mean, if you go back and you read some of the different accounts, they believed in a greater spirit. They believed in being kind to their fellow man. Occasionally, they ate the enemies, but they were trying to live a good life. But when they tried to take out George Washington, even when the Redcoats tried to take out George Washington, they could not hit him. There was something on. He had some kind of protection going on. Andrew Jackson had the same exact thing. If you look at the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812, many will say it was the elements that won the war for those who were on the earth that were trying to do this revolution. When they crossed the Delaware, the account of that is like it was something beyond the norm. There was a hand of providence that helped that. Even in the War of 1812, you had these battle-hardened British troops that had taken care of Napoleon and his armies, had come to Washington and had ransacked it, burned the White House. And right when they're about to claim victory, you have a Category 5 hurricane that shows up and wipes out more of the English than the Americans were able to do. After that, they left. I mean, and already the war had been resolved by treaty, but they didn't know that. And so they had gone down to Louisiana, and then all of a sudden you have Andrew Jackson. He's able to have a defeat that occurs in Louisiana that actually sets the stage for the rest of the United States, because of their coming down that way, you had the Louisiana Purchase, because the Napoleon said, well, if I want to lose it, I'm going to give it to, let's give it to the Americans, and that way the British left fine. So you had the growth of this land. Now, continuing on with this, we have a couple other questions. Many people have looked at the country and they've said, we're an unjust country. We've had all these problems in our life. And actually, some of these things are actually covered in the scriptures and in the Book of Mormon to help us understand and realize that God knew these things were going to happen, and he did them, and these things are there for a reason. So, you have the question, what about the slave question? What about the indigenous population question? What about the imperfect peoples and their imperfect government? What does Zenos tell us about that? What do you see? What kind of covenant curses do we see on America today? And really, why do we see all these people from all the world, different races, different cultures, different religions, being drawn to America? It's the one place in the world we are like the big, I'll use the word flytrap, whatever. Everything is coming here, and people want to be here for a reason. The question is why? And I think the Book of Mormon solves that question by discussing the covenant on the land. When you look, we talk about the slave question. Again, going back to Isaiah chapter 14, this is one of the ones that Nephi quoted. He talks about that he's going to have mercy on Jacob and will yet choose Israel and set them in their own land. So they're going to be put back in their land, and they're going to have people with them, and those people that come with them are going to cleave to them. And that doesn't mean they're going to be separate. It means they're going to cling to them like anything else. And the people that they're going to bring, these are people that had possessed them as slaves anciently. So here's the question. How does that rectify with God? And again, if we go back into the Book of Mormon, I talked a little bit about this last week, other covenant people were wrapped into the covenant of Lehi. And so when we talk about a covenant, it's not just for one specific bloodline in the sense of, they're all Anglo-Saxon, whatever. We're talking about people who have been wrapped into the same family tree because of these covenants. And they get the people, and I'll break it down here real quick. You have the people of Anti, you have the Lehiites who had married outside the covenant, and the Nephites who probably married outside the covenant. And those people had been brought back into the covenant, had been redeemed, like a Goel, why do you want to say if you're Jewish, and been part of the Lehi covenant by covenant with the people and to this group of people, the anti-Nephi Lehis. And so when we talk about the restoration and we're looking at these things, there's a reason Isaiah says this has to happen, is because all the people who were part of this original covenant have to have their seed brought back to it for the restoration. And so you're going to see people brought from all over. I mean, there are people that were, I'm trying to remember, gosh, my brain is going blank again. I guess I should not stare at a screen because I can't remember. But anyways, one of the first brethren that was African-American, one of his ancestors came to him and said, you need to go see Joseph. You need to find out about this. I always the sister that came to Emma and was her friend and her consort and her supporter. I forgot her name again too. So I'm terrible. These people were brought here because they're part of this covenant. This is not about white versus black. These are all people part of the covenant. And when we understand that, then these covenants will make a little bit more sense. You have Asians that are part of the covenant, all different kinds of people. But the question then comes to this, when we get to the end of the Book of Mormon and 4th Nephi, actually even at the very end, what's a Lamanite? We don't know. The DNA doesn't really match, because the only difference between a Nephite and a Lamanite in 4th Nephi is one believed in Christ and the other one didn't. But we do know that if they were, and this goes back to the allegory of Zenus, if they're still in the covenant, in other words, they hadn't married outside the covenant of the land will respond to them. I use an example in the book where I talk about the Jews who went back to the land of Israel in 1947. And as soon as they became a country, 5 Arab nations launched a war on them immediately to destroy them. And they got a bunch of people in their own lands who were the Palestinians. And they said, look, if you go kill all the Jews, you can have their land. And so they got a huge army together, and they were able to send them towards the Israelis. And unfortunately, they lost, because the Israelis somehow won. They won not only in 1947, they had the 67 war. They won that one when they should have lost. You had the 72, the Yom Kippur War. And it just seems like there's some kind of hand of providence over them. And it's not that they're any better than the other people. It is they have a covenant with the land, because they are descendants that have been given and I'll use the modern term, I'll just use property rights for that particular piece of real estate. The Lord blesses them in that land until they're fully ripe. Now, God doesn't just he's picked many people to be to have covenants with. You can look at the Jaredites. They had a conditional covenant for the land of Lehi, and they were there until they became wicked, and because they were wicked, they were destroyed. You also have the people that lived in the land of Canaan. They had a conditional covenant on it too. In the Book of Mormon, it talks about how the Lord's not going to destroy a righteous people, but they had become ripe in iniquity. They even had prophets. You have Balaam, who's one of their prophets, who one of the kings was trying to get him to curse the Israelites, and he couldn't do it. He was with the Midianites. But so when we look at the covenant land, it responds to the people who have the right to that land. And that's what we see with the founding fathers. That's what we see, even though they're not perfect, even though they have issues, even though they're not the bright white marble kind of people that we see in statutes. But they aren't ripe in iniquity yet. But here's my question then. When I was looking at this, I go, what's the difference between a Lamanite and a Gentile Lamanite? It's basically one is in the covenant, one's out of the covenant. An interesting thing is, if you look in 2nd Nephi 26:15, it talks about the destructions of the Nephites, and it talks about that that they'll camp against them and lay siege to them and destroy them and all this other stuff. That happened. We read that in 4th Nephi. They were utterly destroyed. But that wasn't the founding fathers. Who was that? And there's an interesting book. I'll show it to you once I turn off the sharing. It's a book called Traced, which is written by Dr. Nathaniel T. Jensen, who looks at the Y-DNA, and he says, you can actually use it as a clock. And he has nothing to do with the LDS Church or anything LDS. He's actually a Baptist. But if you do it, you see population movements in the world that coincide with exactly what happened in 2nd Nephi 26:15. It was about 200 AD. There was an explosion in Asia. Basically, the Mongols were out hunting, and everybody was running to the east, to the west, to the north, and to the south. And you see that in this DNA as it spreads across the world. So it's kind of interesting. These are Gentiles. So when we look at the land of America, when you get here, they're not bad people, but they're what I call Gentile Lamanites. They're people that have married the remnant that were here. They're trying to do what's right, but because they don't have the covenant right to the land, as long as they deal nicely with the the people who have the covenant right, they do fine. If you look at the pilgrims when they landed, the Native Americans that were there, they had no problems with. They lived in peace and kindness with one another. It wasn't until a few years later that they said, guys, they're starting to act too much like them. We need to get them out of our lands. Then when the war started, that's when they started to lose, because they had gone against the covenant of the land. Okay, let's get the next one here. But this is, I think, the key, and it's the promise of the Lord to Zenos about this whole thing. And this is when I read this is kind of what gives me hope, because I recognize that we're all imperfect beings. None of us have the right way. We all have our own opinions. We're all bembered into the walls. But he basically said this: as they begin to grow, and he's talking about the restoring the branches back to the trees, and trying to keep the wicked fruit, which is the wicked traditions of all the different branches, from overcoming the tree. That he says this, goes, well, shall clear away the branches which bring forth bitter fruit, according to the strength and the good and the size thereof. And you shall not clear away all the bad all at once. So it's interesting here. God's not going to destroy everybody that's bad. He's going to leave them there so that it maintains balance in the tree, lest the roots thereof should be too strong for the graft, and the graft thereof shall perish, and I lose the trees of my vineyard. And so he does a balancing act. We're a work in progress. And that's what you see when you look at the land of Lehi. We may not be perfect, but we're a work in progress. The Civil War is an act of a work in progress. We realized as a people, at least some did, that what we had with slavery was wrong. I mean, if you go back and you talk to Abraham Lincoln, there's a guy who wrote a book called The American Covenant, Timothy Ballard. And he talks about how Abraham Lincoln had gotten a copy of the Book of Mormon from the Library of Congress, and he always dog-eared pages. And he went to the Library of Congress and actually found the Book of Mormon. And when he took it out, he found it was dog-eared in Alma, where it's talking about the covenant of the land, and how if you do what's right, the Lord will bless you. And if you don't do what's right, then the Lord will curse you. And it was then that he wrote the Proclamation of Emancipation. I mean, it's kind of all ties together. You see the Lord using the scriptures to help people overcome the wickedness. And as we change, we become better. Okay. Now, Ezekiel, he's another one that prophesies a lot about the last days, and he prophesies about the house of Israel and the covenant people of the Lord. The question is, who's he talking about? When Ezekiel gave this prophecy, it was after the house of Israel had been already destroyed. So who in the world is he talking about? If we go to chapter 4 of Ezekiel, and look in verses 1 through 6, we get an idea. It actually gives us a couple markers. One, it talks about the destruction of the Jews after they had laid on their, let's see, and more, blah, blah, blah. No, that's the left. So lay on the right side for the house of Judah, and 40 years after that, they'll be destroyed as people. So you had an event, which is like laying on your right side. So whatever event that is, let's call it the Passover. 40 years from that, the Jews are destroyed as a people. Now we go to the house of Israel. Lay on your left side. So the other side, so if we have two bookend feasts, let's say one is Passover, the other bookend feast, let's say is Sukkot or Feast of Tabernacles. Maybe that was when Christ showed up in 3rd Nephi, because it actually kind of matches, because in 3rd Nephi, when he shows up, they have the sacrament, which is a feast. And then the next day, he brings the feast. And that's exactly how the Feast of Sukkot works, is that it's a 7-day feast. At the end of the 7th day, they have a feast. Or it's a 7-day it's a 7-day gosh, my brain's come blank again, sorry. Series of sacrifices, and then on the 7th day they have a feast, and then on the 8th day, and on the 7th day they proclaim the king to be the vassal representative of God, to be his son. And on the 8th day, the king brings the feast and feeds the people. And that's exactly what you see in 3rd Nephi, where Christ brings the sacrament and feeds the people. But the interesting thing is that he says that 390 days after that event, they'll be destroyed. Again, like I said earlier, we talked about the house of Israel was destroyed in 740 BC. They're already gone. So who is he talking about? I always think it's kind of interesting. If you look in the Book of Mormon, about 390 years after Christ shows up, the Nephites are destroyed as a people. I also think it's interesting when they talk about the destruction of Israel, that they're going to lay a siege against it, build a fort against it, actually mirroring the words of 2nd Nephi. So Ezekiel's prophecy talks about a few things. He talks about the valley of dry bones. in the LDS church, a lot of people talk about that's resurrection. But if you talk to any good Jew or rabbi, they'll tell you that's the restoration of a covenant people to their promised land. I find interesting that the restoration takes place before the coming forth of the Book of Mormon. And in Ezekiel chapter 37, you see after the restoration of the land, you see the Book of Mormon coming forth. And then you start to see that the children of Israel are going to be gathered home. And then because of problems, there's a cleansing going on. And then you have this Latter-day servant who shows up to help them at the end. This happens during the time of this battle called the Battle of Gog and Magog. And pestilence are going to happen, all sorts of things. If you go to Isaiah 19, read the shorthand version, that's the Reader's Digest version. The Lord sends forth a Latter-day servant, a mighty and strong one, somebody who speaks eternal words as a resurrected being. And he basically turns the armies that have come to battle. And in Isaiah 19, it's actually Egypt is what he called, but it's a metaphor for the children of Israel in the last days. That he causes them to win, and then when people see him and they realize that there is such a thing as a resurrected being, they change and they build this city. They call it a city of light, and from that it's the city of New Jerusalem, which is what we all are hoping and praying will come in our lifetimes, and we know where it'll be. So that's kind of how Ezekiel ties into this in this whole covenant. Let's see. So last little bit here. Why does this even matter? People have asked me, what's the point of this whole thing? The whole point is this. We live in an age where God has made promises. If we don't know who we are, if we can find out who we are, and that the scriptures have actually been written for us, to us, by our own ancestors who are yelling at us to wake up and pay attention, because we have covenant curses, they're going to hit us. And we all say, well, what are covenant curses? There's a brother named Jonathan Cahn. He's written a series of books, and he's the one that really has seen these covenant curses. And his last one is called Return of the Gods. And he even talks about the rise of Baalism in our land, in our country, how we are all going to these different gods that used to plague ancient Israel. And he lays it out in black and white, and you can see these things actually happening. Most of us just kind of look at it and say, oh, it's just a weird world, we're all nuts. But it's interesting, if you go back to Isaiah chapter 19, the person that I enjoy the best reading in Isaiah is actually Abram Gileadi. He is a member of the LDS church, but before he was a member of the LDS church, he had gone to rabbinical school, and he understands how a 3,000-year-old Hebrew thinks, or Jew thinks. And so he was able to write some of the metaphors into modern English, so it actually makes sense, so we can understand what that means. Anyways, in his translation of Isaiah 19, it talks about the fact that in the last days, we will have transgender issues. And I've known about this for 3 decades. And I look around me right now and I'm going, whoa, if that isn't the writing on the wall, what is? And so that's my whole point of this whole book and this whole presentation, is just for us to recognize who we are and what's right before our eyes. We have this book. We love this book. I adore the Book of Mormon. I read it all the time. I see things that I've never seen before, the patterns, the images. I see it happening. And to me, it brings me peace, because I know that God knew what was going to happen before it happened. It's pleading for us to turn back to him, to overcome our weaknesses, and to repent, so that we can, as Paul has said, all come together in Zion as a unified people and enjoy one another's company. That's the quick overview, the thumb sketch of what I had written. I'm willing to take questions now. Hang on one second. I've not been able to figure out how to get out of. Oh, hang on. There I am. So that's it. You can tell me anything you want. I'm okay. I've got real thick skin. I have footnoted the living snot out of this thing. So I said a lot of things in generality. I didn't write them down, but I do have the footnotes. And if anybody wants a PDF copy of what I've done, I'm more than happy to send it. The only thing I ask is for feedback, because I'm trying to get it finished so I can get it published. And I will take any criticism, any whatever. If you don't understand something, if you think I'm totally wrong, I'm up for it. Just let me know. Sorry, go ahead.
You're fine. Thanks, Jim. And Paul, Paul still
Yes.
here?
I'm trying to respond. I'm sorry I'm not able to get on the face-to-face approach, but at least I'm on the iPhone. Thank you, Jim, for the presentation, and I appreciate the fascinating assortment of materials you pulled together. I would like for you to go back and just explain the very basic one. What is a covenant?
The covenant is a promise between God and a group of people that he establishes so that he can do his own purposes, which is basically, hopefully, have us be righteous and not be sinners. He promises when God does a covenant, he gives you, typically in the Old Testament, he changes your name, he gives you a chunk of real estate, he gives you promises of protection and posterity and prosperity, those 5 things.
Okay, well, that sounds to me an awful lot like the kind of things that the winners write about history.
Well,
what's
it
the
could
difference?
be. Well, the Jews will tell you they didn't win very much because with their covenant, they have been a hiss and a byword throughout the world. But it is a way in which God can talk to all of his children. We're all his children. It doesn't matter where you're from. It doesn't matter what you look like. I mean, to my grandmother's chagrin, I only say this because she's from the South, I found out the other day who my 9th cousin was, and it's actually Martin Luther King Jr. I'm related. I think it's great. We're all related to each other. We all have interconnections. And that's the thing about the allegory of Zenus with these covenants. God is using this covenant to spread this throughout the world to bring us all in. It's almost like, we all become part of this huge family. And I mean, you had talked about your wife and the Polynesians. I believe fully that your wife is part of this covenant because if you go back and you look at the people of Anti, the Canaanite word for anti means seafarer. Polynesians are seafarers. They were probably part of that entire covenant and are out there and, they have bits and pieces of it. That's why they feel the spirit. I mean, I was talking to, and I'm actually related now to the Polynesians. My 2 of my nieces married, one a Tongan and another one it starts with a S. Gosh, my brain just went blank. Anyways, so on. And but when they talk about, I was talking about the word haole. Haole means breathless. And they would come up to people and they would put their heads to people and they would breathe in the air of each other, breathe in the spirit. And when Captain Cook went to the Hawaiian Islands, he didn't know how to do that. And so they called him a haole. You're breathless. Instead of aloha, here, I'm giving you breath. And it all, I think, ties back to the scriptures. I mean, even though they may not understand it now, but it's all probably in history going back to when they were part of this covenant as the anti-Nephi Lehis. They had that spirit. They wanted to share it. Does that make sense?
Well, I'm a haole, but I understood that was because my red skin got burned quite readily, and was quite a laughable concern to my wife's family. I appreciate that, and yes, I'll yield to other people that have questions and come back at you with more questions later. But
no problem.
If Bob was trying to help me get on so I can see people too, and so we'll see if that works. But please, I presume there's other people with their hands up, and
Yes, there are.
Okay, then let me yield.
Okay, thanks. Wednesday, go ahead, please. Nice to see you.
Hi, it's nice to see you too, Deb. Nice to see you, everyone. So Jim, I've noticed that you tend to correlate God's favor with might. We see, at least from what I'm understanding of your presentation, a lot of the things like that were pointed out, like George Washington with Andrew Jackson, a lot of these are being able to, spread across the United States. A lot of these things are accomplished by might or accomplished by the sword. In my experience, God doesn't necessarily favor the powerful. In fact, we find in the New Testament, a lot of times Jesus favors the meek. So I'm not quite on board with you with that, what I'm understanding what this might is showing of God's favor. Or so how do you, is that something that you're reporting, or do you see what contradiction I'm talking about here?
I don't think that it's might. If you look at the founding fathers, if you look at Andrew Jackson, the Americans had no might. They were, I can't use the words I want to use, but they were in a bad place. They were going to get the shellacked is the right word. If you look at George Washington, I have always said he couldn't win a battle if you paid him. It wasn't him that won the battles. It was the when they crossed the Delaware, you go back and you read that, when you read the history of the crossing of the Delaware, there is no tactical advantage of their might going forth to do that. They were actually blessed by God because of the fog that happened that prevented the English, who outgunned them and outmanned them and everything else, to be able to do it. Even in the Battle of, oh gosh, it's where they had the German mercenaries. They actually won the battle and they didn't hardly do anything. It's not might, is what I'm in that sense. It's a covenant of protection, which means because they have, and I'll just use a right to the land because they own the real estate. I mean, I'll use the Middle East as a good example. I know everybody loves to hate the Jews, so I'll just try to use that one. Occupancy does not guarantee you covenant protections. Okay. In other words, if I live in a land that I don't have the covenant right to, I don't get to get the covenant of the land because I don't have it. It's not mine. It's whoever has it. And as long as I'm with the people that have the covenant of the land and I'm supporting them, I'm blessed. You look at the kingmen in the Book of Mormon. It's a good example. The kingmen were probably the descendants of the Mulekites, who probably were the higher ups in Judah and the royalty and everything else. And they had this concept of, we should be kings. And as long as they didn't get really crazy, they were fine. But when they decided that they knew better than the Lord and the governor of the land, and they started the war, who did the Lord protect? Who did he help? I mean, the kingmen started it, and the Nephites had to fight it and had to win it, but the Nephites had the protection. I mean, in the Book of Mormon, a good example, you talk about might. And Moroni, or it's Mormon, says this basically: when they're driven back to the land of desolation and they're all angry because their wives and their children have been killed, and even they say, we've had it, we're going to go fight them. And they, in an offensive maneuver, go forth to attack the Lamanites. That's when he says that's the end of the Nephites. If they had never done that, they still would have been protected and they wouldn't have been destroyed. But because they had gone out and prosecuted a war when they should have stayed, they began to lose. So anytime you look, like I said, Andrew Jackson, he should have lost that battle, but something happened. I mean, it was just the stupid hills as they went up the thing. The English got caught. I mean, if you look at
they were unfamiliar with the geography. And I'm from South Carolina, and we have Marion Swamp Fox Marion, and we understand that they were at a disadvantage, but they knew how the geography, they knew how to go around the swamps and the natural predators. They were aware of those things when the British
I mean,
there were certain advantages. I'm talking more like, for example, like the Native Americans. While they might have been outnumbered the people who came here to settle, certainly things like smallpox and guns played a role. I mean, I'm not.
You have the, like, I'll use an example. This was written by Michael Medved. He wrote a book on the blessings of God on the founding fathers. And he was talking about when the founding fathers got to Plymouth. And as John Bradford is sitting on the boat and he's writing in his journal, there's no inn, there's no store, there's nothing here. We're just totally without squat. And the next day they meet Squantos, who had been captured, had gone away to England and came back. He spoke English, but his entire tribe had died because of a plague. It was before the white man got there, and it wasn't a white man plague. It was just something that had come through. And he actually gave that land and those things to the pilgrims so they had a place to stay. Now, some would say that is the foreknowledge of God, and he, because those people were going to get the sick, he allowed that to happen and gave these people to come back a chance to have a place to live. I mean, we could argue, I guess, history is written by the winners.
That's kind of what I'm saying. It sounds like you're looking at it from a point of view of, well, they won, therefore they must have lost.
That was my whole point, though. You have covenant promises, but in addition to covenant promises, you have covenant curses. And the covenant curses are this: if you don't stand up and do what you're supposed to do, you first lose your covenant of protection. You secondly lose your covenant of prosperity. Then you lose your covenant of having kids. And then finally, you lose your land. Okay, it goes in reverse order back that way. And so it's not just you win and you get the right to it. If you don't do what you're supposed to do with it, you'll lose it. And that's what happened to ancient Israel. That's what happened to the Nephites. And that's what Jonathan Cahn, who is, like I said, a Messianic Jew, he doesn't have a dog in the race for the Book of Mormon and this covenant, but he sees it happening and he's worried. He's already shown that we lost the covenant of protection in 2001 with the dropping of the Twin Towers. And there's a lot of correlations there. For example, in Isaiah 9:10, it talks about when the Assyrians come in and they destroy it, the arrogant Israelites say, you know what? Where there was brick, we will put stone. Where there was a sycamore, we're going to put a pine tree. And when you look at happened in 9:10, Dom Daschle, the day of the attack, quoted Isaiah 9:10, but he quoted it in the arrogance way. You have the Freedom Stone brought in as a base foundation for the Freedom Tower. You have the tree that took the beam that was screaming down towards the church where the country did the covenant prayer with George Washington. So when George Washington was finally elected president and sworn in, he then took the entire Continental Congress from the federal courthouse in New York down to this little chapel that was in the harbor, and he made them all kneel down. And he had a covenant prayer there, much like when Solomon had a covenant prayer for the building of the temple in Jerusalem. That little stone chapel had 7 big buildings built around it called the Twin Towers, or called the Towers. And the Twin Towers were there. One of the beams came screaming out of, I think it was tower number 7, and was going to hit that chapel and actually took out a sycamore tree. They planted a pine tree in its stead, an evergreen. Fulfilling, again, like I said, if we truly believe the Book of Mormon is saying what it's saying, then it's that history is being refulfilled right there. So he saw that. So Jonathan Cahn saw that. Then he saw the economic woes. It happened 7 years later. He's going on what's called a Shemitah cycle. And then the next one, everybody thought, well, that'll be the end of the world. No, it was posterity. You saw a direct decrease in the population of the United States for the first time. It started decreasing. By the way, the Shemitah that's coming up this year is the one with, if we don't repent, we lose the land. So I'm kind of worried about that, but we'll see what happens. But anyways, that's my whole point is it's not just they have a right to the land. They have a right only as long as they are righteous. If they turn away from their righteousness, they suffer the covenant curses. I don't know if that helps any.
I don't know. I've just seen a lot of atrocities justified that way.
Well,
So-
I understand the atrocities, and that's why I talked about the allegory of Zenos, where he said all the wickedness wasn't going to go away at one moment. We're a work in progress. We're all a work in progress. I'm a work in progress. I'll tell you that. I don't know if that helps.
I think I find your analysis lacking, but that could just be my personal understanding. But I appreciate that you took the time to explain it. Thank you.
Okay, no problem.
Wrong button.
Okay, Paul, looks like you're next. I don't see any other hands up at the moment. You are muted, Paul. Okay,
Thank you. I did finally get on so I can see your faces, and I appreciate that.
Yep.
I'd like for you, Jim, to explain more clearly just where the United States is in this process. It strikes me that with so many wealthy people doing so well that it's become their promised land, and if they are there because they're righteous and having and claiming the covenant to the land of promise, and I'm a little bit suspicious of the reading. Perhaps you'll clarify that for us.
Okay, let me make sure I understand your question. First off, let me explain that the children of Lehi come from all. Sorry, go ahead.
All right, well, let me try to clarify my question.
Okay.
America, I think you're saying that America is a God's covenant land to a righteous people.
I hope so.
Right. That where are we in terms of being a righteous country in that in the overall process that outlined, in which you have the righteous that are entitled to the land, and if they're not, then they're entitled to be destroyed.
Well, I would say if you read Isaiah 19, which is a shorthand version, we're pretty dang close. A lot of things are occurring around us if I look at my country when I was a kid, I'm 61 now. From when I was a young man to now, I can't recognize it in several senses because we have become so, you can't even speak to people without it, as the scriptures say, being crucified for a word. You know, you say something wrong and all of a sudden you're canceled. You know, we're walking away from our Judean Christian beliefs. And I know people that are Islam will say, you know, that's good. But I do believe that, you know, there's this land for all peoples, and I don't care what color you are, I don't care where you came from, I don't care whatever. This is a land of freedom for them. This is a land of peace. This is a holy land for them. It's interesting to my mind that everybody in the world wants to come here. And, you know, I think New York Post had something back in May. It said through the southern border, over 100 countries have been represented of people coming through the southern border. This is not just a place for white Anglo-Saxons, if you want to call it that. And, you know, we can't even, you know, when I look at my genealogy, I've got every different color you can think of all the different peoples, whether they're Latino or they're Black or they're Asian. I mean, I've got the whole 9 yards. I've got a daughter-in-law that's from, her ancestors from India even, you know, so it's all intermixed. I mean, just because I look a certain way doesn't mean that I'm this purist whatever. And I think that's when you look at the allegory of Zenus, you see that these are all intermixed branches that have been grafted in, that we do that. Now, where are we on the path? Well, you know, it's like playing chess. You got to identify the pieces on the table, then you got to identify where they're playing, and you got to make sure you're not playing checkers while somebody else is playing chess. I do believe that we're probably in the latter end of what Daniel saw, what John saw. We're getting close. And I'm not talking about when Christ comes. I'm talking about the stuff that all has to happen before the building of New Jerusalem. You know, we talk about Zion. We talk about building a temple in independence. I think that's great. People talk about it. They love it. But there's all sorts of bad things that happen before that lead up to that. And, you know, I'm not going to take one political party over the other. I mean, I see Gadianton robbers everywhere I look these days. I love the Book of Mormon for that. It kind of gives me a little bit of peace in mind. I recognize that God realizes that we would have these issues. But I think we're, you know, you're seeing things happening. I mean, like I said, when I read Abram Gileadi's translation of Isaiah, he talked about one of the key things happening before the invasion of the Assyrian, or we call it Gog and Magog, was that the people would have transgender issues. And I just think that's kind of interesting that in the last year and a half, that has been one of the biggest issues that are out there. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, Bobby and Paul.
I'm sorry?
You raised the question. I think you in your presentation indicated the New Jerusalem with Missouri. I think you indicated that.
Paul,
I'm sorry?
I say you're breaking up a little bit. Can you repeat that?
Okay. All right. I think in your presentation you indicated that the New Jerusalem was in Missouri, and that God was favoring Missouri as a renewal of the Garden of Eden, if I understood you correctly, and that that therefore this was well. But then Genesis tells us that Garden of Eden was adjacent to the Tigris to the Euphrates River. That's quite a separation.
So back in the day, when
the covenant land then would appear to be the world.
Well, here's a fun one. So back in the day when I served my mission, I actually served my mission in Salt Lake City. So it's sort of like a Catholic going to the Vatican, I guess. But there was a brother that had joined the church. He was a minister for a different religion. I think he was Presbyterian. And he had figured out where the land where Eden was. And he figured it out by the rivers. And because he had to find one river that branched into 3 rivers. So you had 4 rivers altogether. and he couldn't figure out where it was. And then he had a friend of his who was a geologist, and he told him that there was an old riverbed just, I think it was west of Kansas. And then he goes, oh, well, that would put the land of where the Garden of Eden was like right near Independence. And so he wrote a book about this, and he had been telling people about this for a while, and his congregation was getting a little irritated with him. And one day some LDS missionaries showed up, and he goes, I have one question for you. Where is the Garden of Eden? And he said, there. And they go, well, we've been teaching that for like 150 years. So I know that the rivers, when Noah got off the boat, he called one the Tigris and the other one the Euphrates, but those necessarily are the Tigris and Euphrates. Those are just rivers that he called it over there. But if we look for the seabeds, we might be able to find them in the United States, and that might work for it. The other thing is, like I said, the Lord called in the allegory of Zenos, he called the land of Lehi, wherever it is, a very precious land, a land that is filled with all sorts of good things. And like I said, if you look at the world, where's everybody wanting to go? Sorry, go ahead.
How are you defining? So we as Latter-day Saints, we have a common belief in building Zion, I think. Would you say so, Jim? It's that, I don't know how to say. Yeah. So how are you describing Zion here? And there's a second part to this, because Zion to me is something that we build everywhere in our communities. It is a place where we abolish poverty. It's a place where we try to without suffering. This is something that it's God's peaceable kingdom that we are trying to bring into being. You mentioned like you would see incidents of transgenderism. So something that I think is that we've seen transgender people throughout time. I think it's becoming more mainstream to hear the words in public, but I can think back to, I'm a history nerd too. I can think to ancient Norse times, and while it wasn't like necessarily smiled upon, they even had a word, Sedabringer, one who acquires a womb through magic. And these were people who were, again, not exactly accepted, but were considered to have these magical powers. In India, we have the Hijra, which are third gender. Even here in the United States and many Native American groups, we have people who are two-spirit. And these are all different terms that people are using to express expression of gender that isn't between male and female. So would they necessarily, like in Zion, I'm imagining all like these people would also be welcome.
Yeah,
and
I mean,
how it like necessarily shows, because in my mind, I want to invite, I want to invite all to Christ, and I want to invite all who can help us build Zion into Zion. So what is the challenge there? Where is it that you're understanding that it's more of a modern thing? And is that something that like scripture is warning about in a different way? I can't tell you where in scripture I would have seen that, because I haven't. I don't think it's super addressed, but you're mentioning something. This is something that your teachings are talking about.
Paul talks about it, but
okay. Well, Paul talks about it, but he doesn't. We can talk about Paul another time. We don't have to stop talking.
I know. Like I said, Paul gets everybody irritated. So I'll say it this way. For me, Zion is what you said, loving one another. All right. I have no desire. I have a daughter that is gay. Okay. Do I hate her? No. Am I going to shun her? No. I love her. I'm kind to her. She can make her own choices. That's up to her to make those choices. My choice is to love her. Okay. And so I do that. I mean, if people want to do the other things. So as a people, as individuals, I don't have anything against them. All I'm saying is when I read the scriptures, they talk about certain things and certain specifics, that those are signs. And that's what I'm looking at. Again, like I said, I'm looking at this as a clinical way, like I would as a pilot, when I'm looking at my airspeed dropping, my altitude dropping, and my horizon indicator showing me that I'm heading down. I'm heading down, and I don't want to get passionate about it. I just need to do whatever I need to fix it. And so there are people that, I have many good friends that are Islamic. Does that mean that they have no place in Zion? No, they're good people. Okay. And my definition of Zion For the individuals is that. For the New Jerusalem is a little bit different, because I believe those people aren't necessarily identical with us. I believe they are what I call a terrestrial nature. So if you read in the Book of Mormon, you had the 3 Nephites. They became more of a terrestrial nature. Nothing the Lamanites could do could kill them, because they really weren't of celestial matter. They had been changed. And when I read the scriptures, that's my understanding, is that those who live in New Jerusalem will be that way. I mean, Isaiah says every bomb, every whatever weapon that is designed to destroy the people won't work. It's because they can't affect them. So when I talk of Zion in that regard, they're a different people. They love everybody, but they're just different materially. And you think about, go back to the Old Testament, you talk about the city of Enoch, which was left. They became terrestrial at that time. In the Pearl of Great Price, it talks about that. In Genesis, not so much, but it's there. If you read, I think there's the, what is it? It's the Apocrypha of Abraham. I think it's a Babylonian text. It talks a little bit about that too. But the point is that people in the earth, as they lived here, and as it got wicked and wicked after the city of Enoch left, as they became righteous, or as they became more terrestrial, they were actually beamed up, if you want to use that word. They left and they went to the city of Enoch. So I think that's the same thing we'll see. We'll see normal people who are living, trying to love one another, which will be celestial beings like me. Not perfect. I make mistakes. I'm not whatever. Then you'll have people who have achieved a level of sanctification that they can abide the presence of Christ, and they become terrestrial beings, and they'll be the ones that are living in New Jerusalem. And they're not going to look down their noses. They're not going to scoff at people. They're going to love one another. I mean, that's the key. It's love. I mean, it has nothing to do with I'm better than you. I got more toys than you. It is love. They love one another. And that's the whole point of Zion, is to love one another. Does that answer your question?
It is about a question about Zion. There was a part of it, like when you said that you mentioned like an in-group thing, like I want to kind of follow up with, like, maybe after the next person asks their question, like what when you talk about New Jerusalem, like, are you like, how, like, because how are you deciding, how do we know who's in the covenant, who's not in the covenant? But I'll save that for after David speaks.
Okay.
Okay, David, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Intriguing presentation. Thank you very much for the presentation. But I just got, my curiosity got triggered, so I just had to do a quick check. And according to Google, the country with the highest number of refugees is Turkey. 3.67 million refugees are currently being hosted in Turkey. The country that has a high income, that has the most refugees, is Germany. I would suggest that there are many promised lands in our world, and the United States is not the only one.
Oh, I don't believe it's the only one. I think there are many. I mean, I'll give you, this is the book of Jim, so take it for what it's worth. I can tell you where I think that the poor spot of ground is, and the poor spot of ground. I believe that the poor spot of ground was actually South America, in the Peruvian area. If you go to Chico Norte, which is the first town that they think was built, our first city that was built in South America, probably 10,000 years ago. That's what anthropologists or archaeologists are saying. I believe that was the first settlement. They lived off the ocean. It was right after the flood. They had everything they had to come from the thing. So that's a promised land. The other one, I believe, is actually, it's a worse land. I would say is the British Isles. It's just rockier and crap, and it's not a great place if you're Irish, I guess. So, I mean, but the reason I say those two places, it's interesting because they, you see that they have dealings with, I'll just use when Joseph talked about the fact that a lot of good blood had been planted in the British Isles. You go back and you read the histories of those who live there. They have some interesting history. They talk of the Danites. This is actually in Ireland. Wherever the Danites went, they named the place Dan. In Ireland, it's Dun, D-U-N. And in fact, there's one place when it's translated from Gaelic, it means the city of Dan. So, you can see promised lands there. Like I said, when you go back and you look at the covenants, they're promised lands all over the place. So don't get me wrong saying there's only one promised land. All I'm saying is that there are people being drawn to the Americas for a reason. And I think that's part of the allegory of Zenith, where they're gathering home these branches of people that have been spread throughout the world. The Book of Mormon says that the Lehiites or the Lamanites were spread throughout the world, and they have to be gathered home. And we see this gathering happening. People are coming from Ukraine, they're coming from Romania, they're coming from Russia, they're coming from China, they're coming from Singapore, they're coming from all over the place. I mean, they're just being drawn back here. And it's just, there's a lot of influence. If you look at the southern border, they've had, I don't know, what, 760,000 have come through in the last 2 years. That's a chunk of people. Go ahead, sorry.
Thank you.
Wednesday, looks like maybe it's your turn, but you're muted.
Oh yeah. So I know I was going to ask you, but that also made me think, because you were just coming off with talking of. So yes, a lot of people want to come to America, and I am aware of that. But there's a lot of factors that make people want to come to America, and it's usually because there's something that's been destabilized in their own country. A lot of times America has a role in that. Same with goes for why people are coming up here for money. A lot of times that we're exporting things out for dirt cheap, like cocoa, like getting for chocolate, for example. Or outsourcing our work, that company's outsourcing the work so we can get it done from pennies on the dollar and not pay them very well, and then have it imported here to make money. Like, I don't think God would explicitly say, yeah, go exploit, because I can see just logically where this profit is coming from, where this wealth and prosperity are coming from, and what a lot of people are doing to get it. So it just, I don't necessarily, I think these things are sins rather than being God sanctioned. So, I get your point about people come here, but it's usually because something is sometimes it's something like a war has gone on, and sometimes America has funded the war, right? That happens. And now there's instability and people come here, or because, we've taken a lot of the wealth out with mining. I just can't look at that and be like it's justified, because again, who is in the covenant and who's not? Because those in the covenant.
Again, I'm saying I'm not defining anybody who's specific to the covenant or who's not. I'm just saying you can have the children of Lehi be any color you want from anywhere. I mean, my daughter-in-law comes from Romania. She came to this country because she wanted to come to this country. She became an American citizen because she wanted to be. I have family that have come from Mexico. I have 2 sisters from Mexico. They were not, when my father married their mother, they were Catholic. They had nothing to do with anything that the church, the LDS church, or any of the different varieties of us have. And yet they have come here, and they want to be here. And they actually are members of the LDS church now. I don't even know how that happened. But my point is this: they can be from any group. I mean, I have neighbors that are from, down in South America, not Costa Vida, that's the restaurant. Anyways, really beautiful place. And they're actually moving up here because they told me they felt like this is where they needed to be. Not because of money, not because of war, not because of anything else, but because they felt. One of them was from Nicaragua, and the other one was from the little country that's next to it, which my brain has gone blank on. But anyways, the whole point was they felt that they should be here because that's where they felt God wanted them to be. That's what they told me. I'm not making that up. That's just what they told me. And I've heard that from many different people from different countries. So, I mean, I understand your point of view where you see the atrocities of the United States going around, sticking its thumb in everybody's business and causing all issues. And everybody's done that for centuries. We're not the only ones that have done it. It's been a popular thing to do for everybody. But the point I'm trying to make is the Lord knew this was all going to happen. And he lets wicked people do what they're going to do because he gives us our agency. But he uses the things that are going to happen to his benefit. And if you look at the United States, the Book of Mormon, look at none of this would have happened if the United States hadn't been formed as a government. You know, if you tried to bring forth the Book of Mormon in Europe, what would have happened to you? You would have been burned. I mean, if you were like John Lathrop. John Lathrop was an independent minister. He was the 5th great grandfather of Joseph Smith, maternal grandfather. I love the guy. I want to be part of his family because he's a real cool. He was actually thrown into the basement underneath the dungeon of the dungeon. Okay. I mean, and he was in there for like 5 years, and he is just a cool person because he didn't have hate in his heart. He all he was trying to do was to teach the scriptures and to print a Bible. And that's what they did to him. Okay. So you have these kind of people that are driven. And I think the guy that actually gave him his ticket so he could get on his boat was, it wasn't John Wesleyan, but it was another one of those that started their own church. But he was able to get out, and it was like 1640 is when he fled England. But, you know, there are people that are driven here or want to come here, and they're coming for religious freedom. Some people just want to be able to think. I mean, you have people from China who come here because they can't think at home. I mean, I've had a son that served his mission in Taiwan, but he also spends a bunch of time in China and mainland. And you can't say what you want to say there, because if you want to say it, the state will come get you. Years ago, when the Soviet Union existed, when it finally broke, I had some friends that came from Georgia, which is not in the United States, but was actually in the old Soviet Union. And people thought that he was abusing his wife. And what they didn't realize was, you don't talk outside your home because you don't know what will happen to you if you say something stupid. You might be disappeared tomorrow. And so there are lots of people that just want the freedom, the ability to communicate, to live their lives without having the state come in there and stick their big jackbooted foot on them and kill them. So, I mean, there's lots of, like I said, you can see the United States doing all sorts of things, but the rest of the world's doing the junk too.
I feel you're talking from personal experience, but I can name that happening to the civil rights era and how, you know, they divided over to the Soviet Union so they didn't have to do with Jim Crow. That was something that happened. But just a side note, the temple, as far as a lot of us are concerned, is already built in Independence. So just a fun fact.
I'll tell you what, I was in Independence about 5 years ago, and I saw the temple. It was hovering there. Somebody put a bouncy house up on the on that big grass field. They put a bouncy house for a party. It was just about that. It's my joke. I always tell about that. But I know you guys have that. I didn't think it was a temple though on the temple lot. I thought it was just adjacent.
It's the temple on the temple lot.
Yes. I thought the temple lot was across the way. I might be wrong on that.
It's not where the cornerstones are, but it's on the temple lot.
Okay. I think Paul's got his hand up.
Paul, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I think I heard you making reference to Jane Manning, and I don't think your name, but I'm somehow not clear on how she is a covenant person. You may be talking about her having been consigned to being a servant to Joseph Smith for eternity.
I didn't say she was a servant to Joseph Smith. I said that she came and she was a support to Emma. And I actually have a different view on Jane Manning than I think a lot of people have. I don't know if you want to hear it, but if you want to, I will tell you. And it goes back to the birth of Christ. So you have these wise men that show up at the birth of Christ, and they bring great benefits. And when Christ comes to the Nephites, he's really concerned about Samuel the Lamanite. In fact, he's so much concerned, he says, "Where are your scriptures? Show it to me." And they show him the scriptures. He goes, "Where is the stuff that my servant Samuel said?" And they go, "Oops, we forgot to write that down." So I'm going to take you back just a little bit. This is the book of Jim again. This is my heretical, like I say, I get thrown stone at me in the LDS church, so that's fine. That's okay. But I do believe that Samuel the Lamanite was a Phoenician. And the reason is in Psalms, it talks about the kings that come to Christ that bring the gifts. And one of them is a Phoenician king, our leader. Okay. And the other ones come from the Isles of the Sea. So in the Book of Mormon, it talks about when the angel shows up to the people before the birth of Christ, it actually shows up to wise men. It says it right there, wise men. And you can say, oh, those are political or religious leaders, whatever. But who disappears at the birth of Christ? You have Nephi who disappears, and you have his brother Lehi who disappears, and Samuel disappears. Now, that's all well and good. You know, who knows? They didn't write anymore. But if you go and you read Plutarch, Morelia number 12, in a discussion with Sulla, which is another Greek, they're talking about the moon, and he gets all hot and bothered, and Sulla's trying to calm it down. And he starts going back, and he's starting to talk to the people, and he's starting to quote from, and the guy who, he's a Greek. My brain just went blank on that one. Anyways, he describes a land in Greenland where they have the temple to Kronos. And they talk about a relief ship that goes up there every 40 years. Now, they say that this dude shows up from, and if you sail south and west, you run into this landmass. It's a landmass surrounded by another landmass. And the continentals are the ones that live on the inside, and the Greeks live on the outside. What's interesting is if you go to the, you go up St. Lawrence Seaway and everything else, and you're finding all this Greek crap, and they don't know why they're finding all these Greek coins and stuff. So it's interesting. Like I said, it's an anomaly. Figure out what it is. But anyways, this is my theory. So Nephi, Lehi, and Samuel Layman hop on a boat, and they go to Greenland, to the temple zone, Kronos. They wait for the release ship. In Morelia number 12, it says they get down to Libya, they get Carthage. They get off the boat, they dig up some records, and they head east. Now, the time that Nephi left was about right before, and the old thing would say 1 BC, but it actually, our dating is off because the Nephites used an Egyptian calendar, which based off of a 365-day calendar, but it did not have a leap year in it. So when they got to 300, after so many centuries living in Americas, they were off by 6 months for the birth of the Savior, and that's why everybody blew it and they didn't realize what was happening. But then if you do the math, from the time of the Savior's birth to his crucifixion, and you add in those leap years, the days actually work out, and you find out that he was crucified on the 15th of Nisan, like it says in the scriptures. But anyways, taking that back, you go back into Morelia number 12, and you do the backdating. So it's about 2 BC when this all occurs, when Saul is talking to Plutarch. And so if Christ was visited by 3 Nephites, Nephi, his brother Lehi, and Samuel the Lamanite. And Samuel the Lamanite was a Phoenician, and the dark-skinned Phoenician. If you look in the Cherokee, the word for anti means dark skin. Okay, so if he was that, I think he had a love for Samuel the Lamanite. Because he had a love for Samuel the Lamanite, he was concerned about his writings being in the Book of Mormon when he came to them. Now, fast forward a couple thousand years, what if one of the descendants of Samuel the Lamanite was Sister Man? To me, that is beauty, where he takes somebody he loves and cared about and sent her as a support to Emma. He didn't just send somebody, he sent somebody that he cared about, that whole line that he cared about, and he sent them to go and assist Emma, not to be a slave, not to be a servant for eternity, but to be a help and a support to her. Does that not sound cool? Or am I just the only one that understands that?
Didn't she push to be sealed to her family?
Sorry, go ahead.
If I'm not mistaken, didn't Jane Manning James push to be sealed? Didn't she want to be sealed to her family? She refused that first, and then I was pushing to be sealed with her family, but wasn't allowed it.
I don't remember, but I can look that up. I know that there was some controversy with Brigham and some of the other people, but that doesn't change what I'm trying to discuss, which is if you look at the beauties of these interconnecting lines, where the Lord uses people that he loves to bless other people. Part of covenants. And that's how come that she's part of the covenant, is because Samuel the Lamanite was part of that covenant, because he was wrapped into that covenant when they left and they became the anti-Nephi Lehis. They were brought in by covenant to the Nephites, which is exactly what Isaiah says. They're clinging to those children of Israel because that's where they get their covenant through. It's like a symbiotic relationship. They're linked to each other.
I would toss a challenge too on that one.
Go for it.
Just simply because Jane Manning and her family apparently arrived at the mansion house in the fall of 1843, and then she went west with Brigham in 1846, I believe it was. Aunt Jane, who remained in the mansion house with her grandsons, remained with them and was her support for several years. I suspect there might be confusion between Aunt Jane and Jane Manning, but there were two different Janes who were Black women who served as basic servants in the mansion house.
Okay, I'm talking about Jane Manning. I don't know the other Jane, so I don't know my Nauvoo history as well as you do, so I don't know that one. But I do believe, like I said, when and this again, this is just this is my gut feeling, is that that's that connection I saw there, and I would love to be able to find a descendant of Jane Manning and do some DNA and see on the mitochondrial where it goes. I would be really, if she goes back to Phoenician blood, it would be really cool. By the way, just so you guys know, this is the book. I don't know if you can see it on my camera. It is really cool to read. It's called Traced, and it talks about how populations have shifted across the world and have changed. What we think are normal aren't normal. I mean, things have changed and have shifted, and they use the science of genetics, and it's actually showing that we as a people have been ebbing and flowing all over this planet for a long, long time. Any other questions?
I'm not seeing any hands at the moment.
Well, I think we agree with you that that we certainly are seeing a lot of change, and that there's a great deal of interracial activity, that the human genome is showing us that we are far more interrelated than what we have previously liked to presume. Many, especially those who are advocates for a special race. But
Well,
I think the effect of that is for us to ultimately come to the realization that the superior race is the human race.
I agree with you. I don't believe in a special race. When I see, like I said, when I say the children of Lehi, if you look at the allegory of Zenus, they've married everybody. They're like the Irish. Everybody's Irish. Okay, everybody has somebody that's Irish in their background somewhere, probably. I don't know, but because they were prolific, they went around the entire world. But I don't want to say that there's one race above another. There isn't. We're all part of the human race. The only thing I'm saying is that part of this covenant that brings us all together is the covenant of Lehi. That's what I say. If you look at the allegory of Zenus, all these graftings are intermarrying with different peoples. They're not just joining the church. They're intermarrying with them. So you're having a combined genome at that point.
Commonly at this time, we pause to give people a chance to get another question or comment in, and then if we don't have any other hands raised, then I sing and we shut off the recording, and then we still stay open for a little while for people to discuss if they'd like. I'm not seeing any other hands. Deb, do you see anybody else wanting to speak?
No, Paul, I don't.
Good
By the
night,
way,
the Lord is watching o'er you. Good night, his blessings go before you. Good night, and we'll be praying for you. So good night, may God bless you. Good night, friends.
Right.